Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give it a minute so that folks can trickle in from the waiting room. All right, and that looks like it's everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I just want to quickly talk about the Housing Alliance. We are a statewide coalition working to increase access to safe, decent, and affordable homes for all Pennsylvanians. I don't know if I said that right. We do a variety of webinars on housing and related topics, and our webinars are free for members. So do become a member today. You can do that by visiting housingalliancepa.org/become a member or contact us at info@housingalliancepa for more information. Going to go through some quick logistics. Today's webinar will run approximately for an hour and 30 minutes, and that includes time for Q&A. We encourage you to leave questions to our incredible group of speakers today. If you want to ask the presenters a question, please use the Q&A function. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. The chat function is only to ask the Housing Alliance logistic questions about the webinar and to introduce yourself. So please go ahead, tell us your name, your organization, and where you're calling in from. We will email you a recording of this presentation and any associated materials in approximately 1 week's time. Upcoming webinars. You can find any calendar dates for upcoming webinars on our Housing Alliance events page, or you can just scan the QR code on the screen and it will pop right up. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it over to Phyllis Chamberlain, our Executive Director of the Housing Alliance of PA.
Good morning, everyone. So, as people know, about, I don't know, a couple weeks back, the governor held a press conference announcing the release of the Housing Action Plan that many of you have been involved in terms of providing input to the administration. So today, the Housing Alliance joined with the other statewide groups who are interested in achieving greater housing opportunity in Pennsylvania to bring you this information session with the folks that were really the key point people in the administration in listening to everyone and then designing the plan that you're going to hear more about today. So I want to thank Regional Housing Legal Services, CSH, Neighbor Works Association of Pennsylvania, 10,000 Friends of Pennsylvania, PARA, the Pennsylvania Developers Council, and the Pennsylvania Habitat for Humanity Affiliate Coalition for joining us in bringing you this session today. You can go to the next slide, Chris. So what we're going to do today is hear from Morgan, Stephanie, and Bryce. And then I also want to introduce Melissa Wright, who's the Director of Policy and Planning for DCED. They're going to provide you with an overview of what's in the plan. And then we're going to have plenty of time for questions. I'll pose a number of questions, but I strongly encourage folks to ask any questions that you have by putting them in the Q&A. We're scheduled to 11:30. We will go either to 11:30 or for as long as folks have questions. So I want to thank Morgan, Stephanie, Bryce, and Melissa for being here today. And I'm going to hand it over to Morgan. And Morgan, you have slides to share, right?
I do. I do have slides.
Okay, great.
See what we can do here. All right, you're going to see an Excel sheet at first, but I'm dragging over the slides. All right, can you guys see those?
We can see it, yeah.
Sweet. All right, can you see, are we in slide mode?
No, you can see your notes as well.
Okay, there are no notes, which is definitely a positive for me. That's everything. All right. There we go.
Yes, very nice.
Yep. All right. So first and foremost, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to Phyllis and the Housing Alliance, as well as our suite of sponsors here for taking the time and reaching out and engaging to pull this webinar together. I'll note that we have 378 people right now joining us, not just from across the Commonwealth. I think I saw like in the comments as folks are introducing themselves, we have folks from even the state of Ohio, even outside of Pennsylvania, joining with us today. And I think that large number of attendees is indicative of the fact that this really is a challenge. This really is a policy area that reaches across every part of our state, and that is one of the major challenges that we face today as a nation. This size of this group is not an outlier. We see this level of interest wherever we go and host housing events, whether we're at an in-person event in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, or whether we're at an in-person event in a Potter County or a Tioga County or somewhere that might not have the population of our urban cores, but where folks are still deeply passionate about solving for our housing challenges. So thank you to everybody for your interest. Um, Jumping into the plan, brief agenda for today, go over sort of the background on the plan's development process, why a plan was necessary, jump into some of our recommendations, our focus areas, talk about the governor's proposed 26-27 budget, where the single largest individual component of the budget is a housing-focused initiative, along with a whole host of other smaller housing-focused initiatives, and then a wrap-up where we'll take some questions from the group. So first and foremost, sort of jumping into the background here, when the Shapiro administration came online in 2023, one of the things that the governor instructed my boss, the Secretary of DCED, to do right out of the gate was pull together the state's first comprehensive economic development strategy in over 20 years. And so we immediately got to work on that. One of my colleagues, Sarah Spieshak, sort of led the charge internally on developing that strategy in conjunction with a whole host of folks across the government. And we held a series of roundtables, just like we did in the development of the housing strategy. We went to every region in the Commonwealth and heard from folks on generally what the need is in their communities as it relates broadly to economic development. And we heard many of the things that you would expect us to hear, right? We know we need to bring online new commercial industrial sites. We know we need to invest in main streets. We know we need to make permitting processes easier and quicker across the Commonwealth. But one of the things that we heard, and it didn't matter whether we were in, St. Mary's in Elk County or Center City, Philadelphia, but we heard consistently that housing stock, the ability both to build new housing stock, maintain the housing stock that exists in communities, and ensure that folks have access to that housing stock was an issue that was prevailing across every part of the Commonwealth. And that was one of the areas that sort of surprised us a little bit. Again, we knew we'd hear about the sites. We knew we'd hear about tourism. We knew we'd hear about main streets. We didn't necessarily think that in every region housing would be as prevalent as an issue walking into those roundtables. And so we took that feedback as DCED and did what any good government study does. We incorporated a bullet point into that study, into the economic development strategy, to launch another strategy. In this case, the housing action plan. And so you can see that bullet point here as it reads in Pennsylvania's economic development strategy. I'm not going to read it verbatim on the slide. And as we were undertaking our planning activities, at the same time, our colleagues from across the government were doing similar exercises. Stephanie and Secretary Arkush were going around the Commonwealth meeting with their stakeholders. Housing consistently came up. Secretary Kovulich at the Department of Aging was talking to his stakeholders. Housing consistently came up. Bryce and Director Weissman at PHFA consistently meeting with their stakeholders. You would expect housing to come up as the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency talks to their stakeholders, but it consistently came up fervently with folks recognizing the urgency and need to really focus on the issue in PHFA's conversations. And we took all this feedback back to the governor, not just DCED, but DHS, PHFA, Aging, DMVA, all the different agencies across the Commonwealth. The governor took all that information into account, and on September 12th, 2024, signed Executive Order 2024-03, which instructed the administration to pull together Pennsylvania's first ever housing action plan, a roadmap to solving for our housing challenges. And the governor intentionally structured this as a comprehensive effort, as an effort that would not be, you have to have a spearheading agency, an agency actually responsible for the plan just for organizational purposes. But this initiative was really intended to be a whole of government approach to housing. And so that's how we structured it. We worked across partners in development, in economic development, and in human services, which is a combination that I don't think you see, quite frankly, enough of in state government generally and throughout our Commonwealth broadly. So there you can see the goals of the plan as outlined by Executive Order 2024-03. And so to briefly touch on some of the work that we did to pull this plan together, we held 15 regional roundtables. Every region in the Commonwealth held one roundtable, at least one roundtable in every region on development, held one roundtable in each of the 6 regions, at least one roundtable on housing supports, held an extra roundtable in the city of Pittsburgh, the city of Philadelphia, and the city of Harrisburg, just to make sure that we were reaching folks all across the state and maybe where dates conflicted and folks getting to those roundtables. In addition to those regional roundtables, we also held a number of stakeholder meetings, including those with many of the folks on this call in a virtual format. Housing Alliance, certainly. PIRA, certainly. Engaged with 10,000 Friends, with the neighbor work organizations, with, again, many of the folks on this call. And also held dedicated in-person roundtables focused on aging and focused on folks with disabilities to make sure that this plan is representative of the aspirations, the ambitions of all Pennsylvanians across the Commonwealth. We put out a public survey where we received roughly 2,500 responses. When compared to what we did on the economic development strategy and the survey we put out, that survey received around 300 responses Commonwealth-wide. And so again, you can see that this is an issue that is compared to those results, attracting significant interest from our folks across the state. Compiled a current state of the Pennsylvania housing market report, looking at current market conditions as they impact the housing markets, digging into the data, digging into census data, other proprietary data, making sure that we're well aware of our housing landscape as it exists today. Projected what that landscape is going to look like in the future, and analyzed different state housing programs from states not that aren't Pennsylvania. So looking at 56 different programs that are working all across the nation. And so that led to the development of the plan as was released last month, consisting of 5 overarching goals and 28 actionable initiatives. So just to briefly go over the focus areas, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, to Bryce, to walk you through. We're going to go through some of the initiatives in depth in this. I don't think we're going to go through all of them just because we would be here far past 11:30 if we did. But again, certainly going to leave some time for questions if there's an initiative that you have a question on or a comment on that maybe we don't go into detail as much as we kind of go through the slides. But first and foremost, building and preserving Pennsylvania's housing stock, right? How do we bring more units online? And what can we do as a Commonwealth and in partnership with localities, in partnership with folks on the ground in your communities to preserve the stock that we do have? Number 2, expanding housing opportunity. As important as it is to build the housing and preserve our housing, that's a means to an end, with the end being getting folks access to that housing. So this section largely deals with helping, average Pennsylvanians access housing. Providing pathways to housing stabilization and sustainability. This is really the human services, the DHS sort of section. This is where many of their initiatives come to light. What can we do as a Commonwealth to make sure that our most vulnerable, that our most at-risk residents have access to housing, or able to maintain housing and what can we do as a Commonwealth to expand our housing supports for folks that might be going through crisis, for folks who might need help finding that roof. Modernizing Pennsylvania's housing development regulations, as important as it is to drive more dollars to solving for our housing challenges, it's equally, if not more important, to work on fixing the systems that underpin housing, the regulatory systems that underpin housing. And so this section really is largely focused on reforms to Pennsylvania's development regulations, as well as taking a look at some of our local land use regulations. What can we do to change the fundamentals of the regulatory systems to allow us to bring more units online at more affordable price points, and thus allow for the market to more effectively, more efficiently solve for some of the housing challenges that we face. And then the last proponent here, achieving operational excellence across state government. This is like taking an internal look at ourselves, how we're structured as a state government, and making improvements to both that structure and how we drive programs out of that structure. So like kind of doing taking our medicine and improving the way state government operates as it relates to driving out housing programs and housing policy. So with that, I will turn it over to either Stephanie or Bryce on.
You're going to turn it over to Bryce. I'm going to jump in.
Turn it over to Bryce on building and preserving Pennsylvania's housing stock and some of the initiatives in that section. Bryce, just signal whenever you want me to jump forward in the slides.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good morning, all. It's always a pleasure to be with this group, terrific group, and many of you are, have been colleagues and partners for a long, long time in this work. So I think, what we really need to do, this is really where we're going to have to build our way out of this challenge, and it is going to take a monumental effort to build ourselves the level of housing that we need across from extremely low income through market rate. On the for sale side, on the rental side, we are going to have to build our way out of this issue. And we know it's critical as a part of the overall infrastructure for the Commonwealth, and it will allow us to be competitive going forward in terms of workforce, retention of residents, as well as continuing to have strong and vital communities across the Commonwealth. We currently rank about 44th in the nation for percentage of housing stock constructed between 2019 and 2023. And we know that we've got to jump significantly ahead in order to meet the demand that we are seeing. If you can jump to the next slide. So we, all of us on this call and others have the challenge of building 450 new housing units by 2035. That's 9 years from now. And, at this current rate, we've got to increase our housing production by almost 19,000 a year in order to meet that need. And, this is daunting, but we think with the tool, we have terrific tools. We've got DCED has tools to help local governments and a range of community groups. PHFA has tools, whether it's the low-income housing tax credit program or this FAIR program or other mixed-use development efforts. We have many, many of the tools needed to be able to get us to this goal over the next decade. And so we need to just make sure that we're coordinating those tools and that we're aligning and investing in those resources to make sure that we're focused on the production and preservation of housing across the Commonwealth. You can jump to the next slide. This just shows you sort of where that need is spatially sort of aligned across and arrayed across the Commonwealth. Down in the southeast corner, roughly 206,000 new residential construction's needed, by 2035, up in the northwest, almost 13,000. So you can see it is across the entire state, with the sort of southeast and eastern part of the state being the large bulk of the growth and demand. But the entire Commonwealth has got to step forward and really in order to meet this need. There's no place that is sort of left out from this. You can jump to the next one. So a number of initiatives that we're working on. We through DCED, we are continuing to invest in the residential site infrastructure and mixed-use development program. Morgan, and the DCED team have been using this tool and want to continue to use this tool. They got lots of applications for the most recent round of mixed-use development. So that is a critical, I think, tool, the initiative that we have available. PHFA, whether we have additional tax credits as a part of the enactment of federal tax changes last year. We have the FAIR program, which is on a path to get to $100 million in a couple of years. We've got, other tools, first-time homebuyer assistance, and other sort of programs that can help address the housing stock needs across the Commonwealth. DHS has been working and trying to align their programs and has been looking at things like the 1115 waiver and other sort of efforts, initiatives to help address the housing needs and housing preservation stock. We've got to continue to restore our aging homes and allow homeowners to make the critical repairs to their own homes. This is where the FAIR program has been a significant investment opportunity, funding many, many programs across the Commonwealth in counties, redevelopment authorities, land banks, community development groups to help really address these, the rehabilitation repair programs that exist across to really meet this need. You can jump to the next one. Continuing on some of these initiatives, we need where there are market dynamics that make it difficult to build, whether that's in rural communities, hard-hit communities, we need to boost production there. Again, this is where something like the FAIR program, the tax credit program, DCED's neighborhood assistance program can all help to build housing in these communities. We need to continue to support small and emerging builders. We have capacity challenges across the development spectrum, and we need to be bringing new builders and new developers into the development fold. There's model programs across the state, and we need to be raising those up and highlighting those programs and expanding those programs to get new builders into the infrastructure, building more homes. We need to monitor, and we are in the process of creating an initial database of exploration of affordable housing units, whether that's LIHTC or non-LIHTC projects. We are hoping that, building on some of the work that the University of Pennsylvania has done in Philadelphia, we're hoping that we can actually have sort of an initial database up and running sometime later this year that will begin to highlight this effort across the state. And again, we need to be training the next generation of builders and creating the workforce to help us to build our way through this challenge. You can jump. I am now going to turn it over to Stephanie to talk about housing opportunities for all Pennsylvanians.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Meyer. I serve as a special assistant to Secretary Arkush over at the Department of Human Services and lead our work related to housing and homelessness. Just for fun, before we dive into this one, If so inclined, feel free. We know that in Pennsylvania, over half of the homes in PA are over 50 years old. And many of you know well the joys and pains of making repairs and updates and how costly they can be over time. So, if inclined, and just for fun, if you want to throw your favorite emoji in the chat along with the age of your home, if known, I'll start. I'll note that so far in the presentations we have done, 1783 is the oldest, so I'm really curious to see if anyone that we encounter has a home older than 1783. Oh, 1880. Okay, so we have some fun ones, a lot of variety in here. It goes to say when you are the birthplace of independence, it comes along with having some significantly older housing stock, which makes it all the more important that we preserve that stock over time. So in Pennsylvania, because of the scarcity, some of the things that we know is that it drives up costs compared to people's income. So 1953, ooh, lots of variety in here. And yes, folks will receive the slides after today. Growing expenses are limiting Pennsylvanians' ability to save, invest, and build stability. They're making difficult choices each month on which bills to pay. Can they pick up their prescriptions at the pharmacy when they also have a really high gas bill from the really awful and cold weather we had a few weeks and months ago? So more than 1.4 million Pennsylvania households are spending over 30% of their income on housing. And 1840, excellent. And nearly one in three Pennsylvanians are renting their homes, making it essential to ensure that we are protecting those individuals from unfair treatment or predatory practices and excessive fees. Next slide, please, Morgan. The other thing to note is that as the economy has changed and the market has shifted, the national share of first-time home buyers has fallen. And we increasingly, as we went around the state, we did hear a number of younger folks say that it feels more out of reach for them than in past generations. So we want to ensure that we can prioritize home ownership for Pennsylvanians to build that generational wealth. And over 10,000 properties have tangle titles in Philadelphia, and there are thousands more located throughout the Commonwealth. This is something that our partners from advocates and legal aid really emphasize in their work, is that this is not just an urban issue. There are many rural and suburban communities also dealing with tangled titles when someone passes away and there isn't clear a way to settle that estate over time. Next slide. So some of the initiatives that we are calling for, you may have heard Governor Shapiro in his budget address name some very specific protections he called upon the General Assembly to deliver in terms of strengthening protections for renters and tenants. And some of those are ways to limit or cap application fees. This is not all the time, but sometimes we are hearing that there are application fees being charged that are really quite prohibitive, and many times people are applying for multiple homes, and they're not always viable opportunities. So we want to ensure those protections are in place, perhaps so that they are getting those fees after someone has viewed a unit rather than spending a lot on not real opportunities. We want to prevent and remediate tangled titles through legislative means as well as access to legal aid where needed and support, and make it easier for Pennsylvanians to purchase their first home through assistance with things like down payments, closing costs, etc. Next slide. For us, you heard Morgan note that Secretary Kavulich and the Department of Aging put a lot of work into developing the Aging Our Way master plan for aging for the Commonwealth, and housing was, of course, one of the #1 needs. With our higher population of older adults in Pennsylvania, as well as the nearly 15% of Pennsylvanians with disabilities, it's vital that we ensure and expand housing choices and accessibility, both in terms of new builds, but also in making it easier to rehabilitate or make accessible these older homes that we know can be uniquely challenging to do so. We want to create more opportunities for shared housing. There are some wonderful programs like the Department of Aging's Shared Housing and Resource Exchange Program, as well as some others around the Commonwealth that maybe are supporting people who were previously experiencing homelessness or special populations. And we want to make it easier and more viable to create these opportunities in more places and promote employer-assisted housing programs. The Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency has had a a smaller but very productive program that we'd seek to expand, where when someone is seeking to find their first home to purchase, that an employer can come along and provide some assistance with that. As Morgan noted during the economic development strategy, it was also businesses and companies expressing that housing for their employees was a real need. So that's a way to connect those dots and ensure that they're being able to attract and retain the employees that they need for their plans over time. Next slide. Providing pathways to housing stabilization and stability. From some of the challenges in the 2024 point in time count, which is an annual count of people experiencing homelessness required by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, across Pennsylvania, over 14,088 Pennsylvanians were identified as experiencing homelessness in a single night in January. And amongst that number, there's a few things that are important to highlight. It was a 12% increase from the prior year. The numbers where you saw some significant increases, which are particularly concerning, are older adults who are 55 and up, as well as an increase in unsheltered Pennsylvanians, folks who are staying somewhere not meant for human habitation, maybe their car, on the street, or in an abandoned building. And those are significant increases, and where we heard that folks want and need more resources for emergency shelters. And some communities said they're experiencing unsheltered homelessness on their main streets for the very first time, especially in rural communities who may not have access to an emergency shelter resource locally in their community. And there were over 120,000 eviction filings or foreclosure actions taken against PA households in 2024. We've seen that the activity that had gone down during the COVID-19 pandemic is really just as high back up again. And we need to have viable strategies and support programs like HEMAP at PHFA to help people prevent foreclosure. Next slide. For the initiatives, one of the things that the executive order that the governor issued out called upon is for DHS to specifically work with the governor's office of policy and planning to make recommendations regarding prevention and addressing of homelessness. So our goal here is to align our homelessness support programs, which are often currently spread across multiple agencies at the Department of Community and Economic Development, DHS, the Department of Health, the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, many different places that are addressing these. So align our efforts together and help more Pennsylvanians transition into stable, safe housing. We want to expand those statewide eviction and foreclosure programs to ensure there are resources when someone is facing that housing crisis. Next slide. Thanks. Another initiative that Governor Shapiro called out in his budget address is specifically the need to protect individuals who are fleeing or survivors of domestic abuse. So when someone is taking that first step of trying to plan for safety and leave a dangerous situation, it's often identified that housing is one of the number one reasons why they are not making that move. And we want to ensure that to make it easier for people to terminate their leases if they are leaving that situation so that they can have a safe path to find something viable down the road and are responsible for that tenancy moving forward. We want to protect manufactured housing affordability from private equity. This is something the governor has been going to communities around the Commonwealth and highlighting, especially some of the older adults who maybe bought into a home that they thought there was going to be their forever home for the rest of their golden years in their next chapter. And they're finding that their lot rents are increasing 50% over so many years. So they own their home, but they're paying that monthly lot rent, and it's simply not affordable over time. And it tends to be private equity actors where this is occurring. So we want to put in place stop guards and legislative reforms to protect that affordability with regards to lot rents. and invest in fair housing education and enforcement. We have a number of wonderful fair housing organizations, as well as the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission here in the Commonwealth. And we need to ensure that tenants are aware of their rights and responsibilities with regards to tenancy and how to protect them if there is an issue, especially in areas of discrimination. We know that discrimination based upon disability is the most prevalent form in Pennsylvania, which matches the national trend. So we want to make sure that people know the resources that are available and how they can get support if they need it. The next initiative DHS is particularly excited about. We have our Investments in Health pilot program where we are proposing to add new housing and tenancy services in our Medicaid program. It's a small pilot for a population of people with serious mental illness and chronic health conditions who have high utilization, meaning they interact more with emergency departments in accessing care versus primary care and other sources in the community. We know that hospitals are often bearing the brunt of supporting people who are experiencing homelessness. So we want to provide a pathway to stability and provide time-limited rental assistance and housing stability, financial coaching, financial literacy, job support, make it easier for folks to find and maintain employment, and ultimately reduce costs within our Medicaid program. These interventions will help maintain and reduce that cost curve. So it's a small program, $1 million, when paired with federal matching funds, gets us to $2.5 million each year to run our pilot and support those individuals. And we want to reduce household energy burden by strengthening consumer protections. This is working with the utility companies. Governor Shapiro discussed some of his work and engagement with those utility companies to ensure that processes for prices are transparent and can move forward over time. And we can move on the next slide. Thanks. For modernizing housing development regulations, I will love to pass back to Morgan Boyd.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Steph. So when we were out and about in the communities and we were talking with folks, specifically developers, but also nonprofits, community-based organizations, one of the questions that we posed consistently was if you were given a choice between a significant amount of additional state subsidy for housing-related activities, for housing development, or regulatory reform to make the systems easier to navigate and make it easier to stand up a house, convert a commercial building to a residential building, et cetera, which would you pick? And to a T, developers all across the state effectively said the same thing. We'll take your money if you're offering it, but what we really think would be impactful in changing the system is modernizing, updating the regulations that affect new housing construction, that affect housing conversions. So just a couple points to touch on here, statistics to touch on here. Number one is that in Pennsylvania today, somewhere between 25 to 30% of the construction cost of a new single-family residential unit is attributable to regulations, both at the state and the local level. When you go to multifamily complexes, that number actually increases to north of 40% attributable to regulatory, again, both at the state and local level. And the other thing to note on here, because it relates to an initiative further down in this section, is 13% of all single-family home sales nationwide in 2024 were attributable to private equity investors. These are folks that are coming into communities more often than not that they're not from, purchasing what are usually naturally occurring affordable housing units, putting a mild amount of improvements into them, a negligible amount of improvements into them, and then flipping them for a significant profit or renting them out for a higher rate than the house would otherwise have rented for. So two big points in this section on the regulatory section. Again, I said sort of at the onset of the presentation, no government plan is complete without a bullet point to do another analysis or run another process. This is that bullet point in this plan. We know that, again, 25 to 30% of single-family housing construction costs, north of 40% of multifamily construction costs are attributable to regulations. And so over the course of the next year, we're going to be doing a very hard look, a deep dive into both state and local regulations, looking at the construction code in Pennsylvania, looking at septic requirements, looking at NPDES requirements, anything and everything the state does from the regulatory side that impacts the construction. We're going to try to quantify what those development regulations look like, what they actually do in terms of cost drivers to building new units. And then we're going to make recommendations to the governor and to the General Assembly on areas where we could potentially look to roll back regulations where maybe the cost of the regulation exceeds the public good or the utility of the regulation, recognizing that there still are many things on the books that need to be there for consumer protection, for public safety, to make sure that units actually stand up and continue to remain up once they're built. Similar process on the local level. Look at local land use requirements, look at local land use processes, and make determinations both as to how we can improve those processes. Developers, more than anything else, want speed and certainty when they're standing up units. What can we do at the state level with tweaks to the MPC to allow for that, enable that speed and certainty, as well as any other additional tweaks that we need to change or need to be made to make the MPC a little bit more friendly for new housing construction. Again, we'll be doing a thorough analysis of that over the course of the next year and look forward to diving into that. And the other two areas in this section, strengthening municipal land banks, extending indemnity from environmental liability that is currently present in redevelopment authorities, extending that indemnity to our land banks, allowing for land banks in instances where they're looking to acquire a house that might have a lien on it from inheritance tax or a lien on it otherwise that has been sitting vacant in a community, allowing for the land bank to waive that lien, allowing for local funding options exercised through County Act 137 funds, County Act 151 funds, the Brewster bill that passed a couple of years ago, enabling funds generated from those fees to cover not just programmatic costs associated with land banks, but also the operational costs of staffing and maintaining a land bank. So making significant reforms to those entities to allow them to better drive out housing outcomes and return, vacant units or underutilized vacant lots or underutilized units to productive use. And then lastly, looking at restricting the ability of or disincentivizing the ability for private equity to acquire single family homes, do what I mentioned earlier, put minimal amount of improvements into them, flip them for tremendous profit, taking naturally affordable units off the market, looking at increasing taxes associated with the acquisition of those units by large private equity firms generally operating out of state. And then the last section, we'll move through these, go to budget initiatives, and then open it up for questions. We know that across the Commonwealth, there are a number of agencies that each have different responsibilities for housing. At DEP has oversight over MPDES permits, right? DCD and PHFA have development funding and development programs. DHS, Department of Aging, have their own programs relating to supporting specific population segments. We know that it's complex to navigate state systems. We know that unless you're involved in sort of the day in, day out of housing programs and housing policy, that it can be challenging to find the right program or match with the right provider. And so as a part of the plan, we know we need to do a better job to make those systems easier to navigate. We know we need to do a better job driving programs out, and we know that we need to structure systems internally at the state where there is, a nexus, a hub of housing policy that you can point to and say, this is the point hub for housing across the Commonwealth. So a couple initiatives to touch in this section. Number one, we are going to be appointing a deputy secretary for housing housed at the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. But despite the fact that their home is going to be at DCED, this is an individual whose reach and a deputate whose reach will extend across the agency. I think we're also in the process right now, a little bit behind the deputy secretary, but in the process of looking at onboarding a chief homelessness officer to be housed, to be determined at DCED or DHS, but that we'll have dotted line reporting where we can easily access and staff programs at the Department of Human Services, that we can easily access programs at the Department of Aging or DMVA. But again, hiring this individual, spinning up this department or deputate to coordinate housing policy throughout the Commonwealth. Reforming and revamping our state and local housing programs. This is a toolkit review looking at everything from how we administer our HUD programs at DCED to how we drive out homelessness assistance program dollars at BHS. Going in, assessing what we're doing right, determining where we could improve, and determining if resources are being allocated appropriately across these programs, making necessary changes to them to better drive housing outcomes and better solve for the goals that we've set forth in the plan. Optimizing our LIHTC credits. This is just like we're going to do a comprehensive review of all the Commonwealth's housing programs. The qualified allocation plan at PHFA, which drives out our LIHTC credits, is also in need of review. And so we're going to be conducting a similar effort to modernize the QAP and better drive out our LIHTC credits to build more, in this case, affordable housing across the state. Creating a one-stop, a digital front door to allow folks easier access to our housing programs, and then improving the Commonwealth's data sharing. Right now, our data is very siloized, fragmented between agencies like DCD, PHFA, and DHS. Look where we can legally do so to integrating that data into one system and allowing for end users of maybe one program to be easier connected with other programs that they otherwise qualified for, in addition to otherwise better monitoring our programs for effectiveness. And so I just want to, again, breeze through here some of the budget initiatives before turning it over. I know that folks, when you got 398 folks on the call, I'm sure we have some questions. But Governor has proposed some big swings in this year's proposed budget as it relates to housing. The biggest swing being a $1 billion critical infrastructure investment fund. This fund, as proposed, the lion's share, in the governor's words, will go towards housing stock development and housing stock restoration. The dollars themselves will be, as proposed, driven through the Office of the Budget, with the fund to be capitalized through a bond issuance and deposited in the state's capital facilities fund. But this will be a tremendous swing for us. It gives us the resources that we need to really go out and work across our communities to build more housing stock, to cover gaps in capital stacks where those gaps may exist, and to recapitalize county housing stock repair programs to continue to drive out to the 16,500 folks that are currently on waiting lists for housing stock restoration, or 16,500 households, more folks. Number two, as Stephanie touched on in the DHS section, $1 million investments in health pilot program, looking at leveraging federal Medicaid dollars to better drive outcomes to get folks who are experiencing homelessness, who are at risk of homelessness, secure access to a roof, get those folks access to common household items, and provide them with a pathway upward. To Stephanie's earlier point, that $1 million federalizes to $2.5 million. So it's really good leverage on our end to be able to tap into federal Medicaid dollars. And then there are a number of policy initiatives that are exclusive of a direct budget ask, but which the governor deemed important enough to include in his budget address and to try to drive forward as we negotiate a budget across the legislature and the executive branch. So a couple things just to touch on here. Number one, the governor is proposing again to seal eviction records for individuals who weren't actually evicted. Two, structure fair chance housing reform to prohibit housing discrimination, where an individual may have a past criminal history or a nonviolent criminal history. Number three, addressing tangled titles by authorizing transfer on death deeds, allowing for a housing structure to more easily pass through or circumvent, more accurately, the probate process, get folks access to generational wealth a little bit easier. Capping lot rent increases for manufactured housing communities, and otherwise streamlining our housing leadership, coordination, and data sharing across the Commonwealth. And then again, I touched on the process that we're going to undertake over the next year to modernize or look at modernizing all of our different housing regulations, both the state and the local level. Governor announced that as part of the budget address, and we will be doing that and starting that process in the near future. So thank you guys again for your interest in housing policy, your interest in sort of the future of housing for the Commonwealth. Again, it's great to see so many folks engaged on this issue. We're going to need your help as we push these initiatives through the Pennsylvania General Assembly. And so, I would just ask where a proposal resonates with you and you feel fits some of the need that your individual organizations are seeing as you're engaging with your legislators, your state reps, your state senators. Make sure that you continuously advocate both for housing generally and for the different housing initiatives that the governor has proposed in his budget. So with that, I will turn it back over to Phyllis, who I believe is going to lead us through a question and answer period. I'll stop sharing the screen.
Excellent. So thank you so much. That was a lot of great information. A lot of great strategies are included in the Housing Action Plan. So the first question is really about implementation. To the extent that this has been figured out, can you talk a little bit about what implementation looks like, including what kind of communication do you plan um, on putting out with regard to progress? And what are some of the ways that folks here today can be involved in the continued conversations around design of some of these initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take this one. In terms of implementation, the things that we're focused on in the immediate future are getting the governor's proposals as included in his budget address into law, capitalized, ready to go. So that includes the $1 billion critical infrastructure fund and the $1 million pilot program at DHS, as well as those sort of early action policy initiatives. In the event that we're successful in getting that through the legislature, we'll certainly promote those successes after the budget passes on June 30th, as we know it will. And then we'll start working with you guys to in the case of dollar figures, drive out dollars to communities where we need to build more units, where we need to help folks access those units, where we need to rehabilitate units. Over the long haul, I think priorities are largely going to be determined through a collaboration between our bosses, Stephanie, Bryce, and I's bosses at the cabinet level, the governor's office, and that deputy secretary for housing, that nexus of where housing policy and programs is going to be located in government. And we will absolutely continue our engagement with this group, Phyllis, with the Housing Alliance and with our various stakeholders across the Commonwealth, as not only we sequence those priorities, but as we look to change laws, capitalize new funding streams, and adapt our programs to drive housing outcomes.
Great. So the next question is about the $1 billion infrastructure fund proposal. Can you talk a little bit about the path forward, including how the legislature needs to be involved? And then also, I think it's always helpful to think about the challenges, right? Particularly as we think about our advocacy strategies. But then can you also address there are a number of other uses besides housing? So kind of what can we expect around how much of it will go to housing? And I think there's some concern about the affordability requirements, given that people of all income levels are struggling with housing affordability, but it's hardest to create housing for those at the very lowest end of that income spectrum. So there's some interest in hearing, how that will be addressed.
Yeah. So in terms of the fund broadly, the exact breakdown of if we're successful in going after the full $1 billion, where the three portions are housing, energy facilities, and municipal and school facilities. The governor's proposal is that in his words, the lion's share, his desire is to go towards housing. What that ultimately looks like, what that specific breakdown will be, is going to be, it's going to be determined by our negotiations with the Pennsylvania General Assembly. And I think largely derivative of folks like you, your advocacy, make sure that the legislature understands that the lion's share of this fund does need to go to housing because the need is so tremendous. In terms of how the fund will be deployed in that in the housing subcategory, a portion of it will be, probably the larger portion of it will be deployed for new housing development, but a secondary portion of it will be deployed to recapitalize county housing stock preservation programs. I would hesitate to say, I saw a question in the chat, will we recapitalize the whole home program? I don't know if it will just be like a direct recapitalization of that program, or if we'll work to make some tweaks within that program to allow it to be even more effective in driving dollars out to the folks who need it. But those are the two breakdowns. Your third question, in terms of like breakdown on the development side of how we'll prioritize projects, this fund is meant to cover effectively all types of housing to allow us to fill gaps in capital stacks of effectively all types of housing. I say effectively because like the state's just generally not interested in funding, housing stock that may be above affordability levels for just your average working Pennsylvanian, but certainly at 150%, 140% and below AMI, provide us the ability to go in where there's community need, where we can fill gaps, and where we can bring units online. It's intended to be a flexible mechanism.
Thanks. So the next question is about accessory dwelling units. And I will note the question. Hi, Alana. She has a lot of great ideas about partnering with architects, layering an educational aspect with tech schools. But the question is really about the extent to which the housing plan addresses accessory dwelling units. And she's sort of Alana's also pointing out that it's helpful to have models where residents already know that they'll have the zoning approvals within their municipality. So if you can answer that, and then I'll just mention some of the legislation we've been working on too.
Sure, absolutely. I think I've seen some of that legislation as well. It's good to see that the legislature is taking an interest in this. It's an area that we know we need to focus on. It's an area that we've seen success with other states in pushing ADUs by right through their respective legislatures. In terms of exactly how Pennsylvania or how the administration would be supportive of enabling ADU construction, we broadly think it's an idea worth pursuing. I think that the actual design of how we implement or make it easier for ADU construction and ADU utilization in PA is going to come out of that analysis of the MPC, and out of our conversations with not only advocates like the ones on this call, but also the local government organizations, also real estate developers, also all the different folks that we talk to on a daily basis. I actually just had a conversation on ADUs yesterday with the folks in Center County and at State College. And so it's an area that there definitely is interest in. It's an area I think we can see movement in. But again, in terms of the specifics of how we look to enable the construction of ADUs or the utilization or transformation of like upper garage spaces into ADUs, I think is something that we'll flesh out as we undergo that regulatory review process.
Great. And I just want to note the Housing Alliance is working with 10,000 Friends and the Pennsylvania Housing Choices Coalition, and there is legislation on the House and the Senate to basically make ADUs easier, for lack of a better word, to create, and to do some of what Alana is saying, which is to make sure that people know that this is something that they can do before they start the whole process and have to spend a ton of time and money with lawyers, et cetera. And the Housing Alliance also has a request to give us stories about the impact that ADUs would have. So I just wanted to note that. Okay, the next question is about zoning. So this is from Robert, who's a member of the Planning Commission for the City of Greensburg, and he's noting how much work that their commission is doing around resetting the city's zoning and zoning map. His question is really, what else can they do to make it easier to rebuild in our city? I'd say Morgan, Stephanie, and Bryce, to the extent that you can answer that question, I think it'd also be helpful to just delve a little bit into the zoning recommendations. You did that, but if there's any additional detail, because we all know zoning, I think zoning might be the issue that we hear the most about, and we hear a lot about a lot of things.
Sure. I don't want to dominate the answer to the question. Stephanie or Bryce, you guys want to take this one?
Sure. First of all, it looks like you've taken a lot of great steps already, which is wonderful in Greensburg. A few thoughts of things we've seen have some successes in other areas and in other states. Have seen a lot of areas look at trying to prioritize missing middle or infill development and potentially where a lot where it might have been, they're building one parcel and one unit on there, trying to make it viable to put some more of those smaller units. This was something I think we heard a lot is in different areas over time, it's become illegal to build what is already there in our cities and in our main streets and commercial corridors. So trying to make some options in those spaces. And of course, there's an interest in a lot of communities in trying to think about transit-oriented development and looking to build near some of the different transit stations. So those are just a few ideas, and I know that more will be rolling out over time as we get to do that deep dive.
Thanks. So the next question is referring to that 450,000 number. And the question is really about the affordability levels of that housing.
You want me to take this one, Steph?
Sure. Take a look.
Yeah, so the 450,000 is total aggregate new units, period, that we believe that we need across Pennsylvania. So it's not broken down into like, you know, 60 to 80% is this number, 80 to 100 is this number, 100 to 130 is this number, and then north of that is this number. It's total aggregate units that we feel we need to bring online based on vacancy rates across the Commonwealth. So like we're building to a certain vacancy rate, 12%, which we believe will significantly alleviate some of the affordability issues that we see broadly. Like the strategy is through building new units broadly, we will improve affordability outcomes broadly. And we've seen success in just increasing the build rate in terms of either stalling the increase in costs or even in some cases, the most extreme cases, flatlining or reducing housing costs in cities like Minneapolis and cities in Texas that are building significant amounts of new units, and cities like Raleigh, North Carolina, or Durham, North Carolina, that are just building a lot of new units. We're seeing significantly improved affordability outcomes in places like that.
All right, next question is about supportive housing. Can you talk about the definition, which I think the question is really about who it is for. So the question is this specifically for individuals with intellectual disabilities and autism, or is there an intention to address the need for supportive housing for all people with disabilities facing homelessness and housing insecurity? And there's a little bit of a follow-up about, does the definition vary across different agencies that might focus on different subpopulations?
It's definitely
Thanks.
Stephanie.
Yes, yes, I'll take this one. Yeah, so within the plan, as we know, the plan is a plan through 2035. It's a multi-year plan. And by nature, because of the different ways that supportive housing gets funded, yes, agencies do use different definitions because sometimes they're relying on funding from HUD, and therefore there are certain definitions or funding at play, and requirements. And then if I'm being candid, Nicole, I think this is an area where in a lot of states. I know that the PA Supportive Housing Coalition and Corporation for Supportive Housing, Regional Housing Legal Services have all been doing great work in this space. I do think it often takes some significant legislative engagement as well to educate on what is supportive housing, who is it for, why does it matter. We do intend to promote and expand all supportive housing for a variety of populations who it can be appropriate for, like individuals experiencing homelessness. We specifically named a pilot that is already active that is being run by our Office of Developmental Programs. It's currently operating in 10 counties using proceeds from the closure of one of our state centers. We've had tremendous success with serving people with disabilities who used to be in much more institutional or facility-based settings and now serving in the home and community. So we have this 10 county pilot. It's going incredibly well compared to supporting people in an immediate care facility or in a group home for people with intellectual disabilities or autism. It's saving between 75,000 to 150,000 plus per person per year. We believe this is a program that has great opportunity to continue. So it's one of the reasons we did specifically name it, because it has tremendous potential and we do want to grow it over time, but it is not limited to that population whatsoever. And as far as the definitions, like I noted at the moment, sometimes we are sort of forced to use different definitions, but I think there could be movement together to come up with a more consistent definition amongst our agencies over time. So great flag and thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. So the next question is about older adults wanting to age in the community and how important it is to have more options to be able to either stay in their home, and the issue is really about updates and repairs that they can't afford on a fixed income. Can you talk a little bit about how the plan addresses the issue of older adults remaining in their home?
I think for us, the key here is choice. We want people to have choices because we have a number of older adults who do want to have that. And we want to be able to educate on where programs can be supported, where Medicaid, for example, can pay for certain parts of accessibility, but can't necessarily pay for the broken stair rail that's coming into a home or an unrelated issue. So that's where programs like whole home repairs were so vital because they could tie together many needs and where we want to have flexibility in those. And I'll note too that there are the folks who want to stay and age in place, and there are a lot of folks who told us they want something smaller, more manageable. Maybe they don't want to have to manage a yard or a garden anymore, and they simply can't find it. So the key here is that we want a variety of options and choice for older adults, and we'll be looking at an all of the above approach for these needs.
Great. We'll stay with Stephanie. I think the next question is definitely for you. So, in terms of the proposed investments in health pilot funding, can you talk a little bit about how can organizations, what can they do now to be considered ready once that program gets up and running? And do you have an early sense of what criteria the state will use to determine operating partners? And Stephanie, if you could just repeat for people in maybe 2 sentences what it is, that would be helpful too.
Absolutely. Investments in Health is a proposal to add housing and tenancy support services into our Medicaid program for a small cohort of people experiencing homelessness with serious mental illness and chronic health conditions, and specifically the folks who are getting more care from places like emergency departments, hospital stays that could potentially be prevented if they had more stable housing and care in the community. So with this initiative, I will say first and foremost, a place to start is we need the funding. We discussed the fact that when it's federalized, we have federal authority and approval, and we have to put forward a state matching share. So we have proposed $1 million in this budget, and we do need to ensure that that gets over the finish line. So my ask for this group is please do engage with members in the General Assembly and let them know what this could mean for your community, for the folks that you are serving or that you're struggling to serve if you don't have enough resources. So we want to ensure this gets over the finish line because we have to have those state matching funds to draw down the federal dollars. And then as far as being ready, I will encourage, and I answered one of the other questions saying, please bookmark our website, sign up to receive our updates by email, because any official communication, stakeholder engagement sessions, which actually I do anticipate we'll have one coming up within the next month, will be communicated out through that channel. For developing readiness criteria, that's something we'll be developing over time and putting resources and policy out for folks to see. As far as more generally, I'll say we are envisioning this being the folks who are already delivering these services in the community. So I'm thinking of continuum of care providers who are providing potentially rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, as well as emergency shelters, maybe looking now to build into this stability work to help people get more resources. And the thing I want to emphasize here is that the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development For a variety of reasons, they've prioritized chronic homelessness, where someone has been homeless for 12 months, whether it be consecutively over multiple episodes. They did that because of, scarcity and as well as trying to address folks with some of the highest needs. But it means there's a lot of folks who aren't currently coming up to the top of lists to get any opportunity for supportive housing. So we see this as a really great way. Have heard from folks, we were just out in Indiana, PA, and they were saying how this could be a game changer for many of the families they work with, where they're doing, shift work, but maybe someone in the family has a disability and they're just not quite making enough and they need some support to get that stability over time. So really looking forward to this moving forward. Please help us support it within the budget and more to come as far as the processes moving forward and where we are going to deliver the service. I saw something about areas too. We do anticipate it will be regional in the initial stages, not necessarily statewide. But as the program grows over time, or we can show our successes, it has to be independently monitored. We would look at expanding further. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, next question's about prevailing wage. So, as everybody knows, there's been a conversation for years and years about how difficult it is for some, particularly contractors on small home repair projects, not only, but particularly true, to meet the requirements of prevailing wage. And what that does is that in many cases, the local housing provider just simply can't get the work done. Can you talk a little bit about the extent to which the plan does or does not address prevailing wage? And I will note that in the question, Mark is throwing out a number of possible ways that it could be addressed. I think it's legislative, but I'll let you answer that question.
Yeah, so I'll take that one. A core value of this administration is that a fair day's work deserves a fair day's pay. And so to that extent, the administration would not be supportive of proposals to limit prevailing wage for housing focused projects, to raise that threshold, that $25,000 threshold, on what triggers prevailing wage. In terms of making the process simpler, I think we're open to those conversations. Like, what can we do from an administrative standpoint to make it easier for small contractors to comply with regulatory associated with prevailing wage? But it's not in terms of like tweaking how we do prevailing wage. That's not in the plan.
All right, thank you. Okay, so the next question is, so Tony's referring to the call to action section where he's noting that local governments are encouraged to use local financial tools like LRTA, and tax increment financing to fill funding gaps. He's noting that to his knowledge, the tools are typically used for commercial and industrial projects. And the question is the idea to leverage these tools for mixed use projects, or is there a way that communities, to your knowledge, have been using them for residential only development?
Yeah, so short answer there is yes, right? Leveraging those tools for both pure residential and mixed use development. In a past life, this is a personal example. I'm a recovering county commissioner. We were able to successfully leverage LRTA for some of our neighborhood revitalization projects, and allowing for capital to flow a little bit easier to those projects, lessen the burden of individuals looking to improve their houses. And so I think that they are tools that can be, we think they're tools that can be leveraged currently as is for new or existing residential development.
The next question is about the Chief Homelessness Officer. Can you talk a little bit more about how this new role will function within existing structures, the responsibilities for this position, and how you anticipate the role will expand capacity for the state to address homelessness?
Can discuss that. So, we are really excited about the interviews underway for the new deputy secretary position. And as we've looked at a lot of the work that happens, DHS certainly has a lot with the new establishment of a PA interagency council on addressing homelessness that we stood up. It's a governor appointed council of individuals and representatives, as well as cabinet level officials. We do anticipate that the new position title TBD, but something like a chief homelessness officer would have a lot of really responsibility for ensuring that the priorities and initiatives identified by the council are enacted, and for working to align our programs across agencies. So I mentioned how, we have the homeless assistance program. DCD, of course, has things like the Emergency Solutions Grant for the non-participating jurisdictions who don't receive their direct allocations. The Department of Health has the housing opportunity for persons with HIV and AIDS. We want to work together to align some of those activities and resources so that they can be best maximized in terms of grading, in terms of efficiency, and measuring our outcomes. So we anticipate that the work is it's a big challenge, but we are up to it, and we are very much looking forward to growing that. We do anticipate that there will be some, as Morgan noted, likely dual reporting structure in terms of working across both of our agencies, since we do together tend to have the lion's share of these programs and funding related to homelessness and prevention.
The next question is about modernizing the QAP. Can you share any current thoughts and ideas on what could help optimize LIHTC?
Sure. So
Well, go
Steph,
for
you
it.
want to take that one? You're welcome to.
We can tag team it.
There we
So
go.
I will say for this, I serve as the secretary designee on the board of the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. And the QAP has a process where when it is updated, there is a lengthy public comment. There's a lot of engagement. PHFA is doing fantastic work. We always want to be, as the governor notes, extremely competitive. So they're doing great work. We just want to ensure we're being the best. So I would anticipate this including a national scan of how other state housing finance agencies and different innovations for consideration, and then seeing how things shake out. We want to ensure that we're building for the future and really at the vanguard of what housing finance agencies are doing nationally. So I don't know that we have any one solution, but a lot of things have been lifted up over time, and it would be a public, transparent process as far as moving forward.
I don't even feel the need to tag team after that.
Can you talk about permanently affordable housing and the extent to which that's included in the plan? So some examples are co-ops, shared equity housing, and community land trusts.
Sure, I can take that. In So the plan itself is sort of framed in a way of like building generally and preserving generally more units across the Commonwealth. Where there is interest from communities, from property owners, et cetera, in permanently preserving those houses, in structuring community land trusts where the land is acquired and the valuation of the house is unable to exceed an appreciation of 5 or 10% per year, something to that effect. Like if there are individualized solutions in specific communities to create permanently affordable housing stock, that's something I think that we want to engage with on like a case by case basis. And we'll look forward to, if you have a specific project or initiative that you want us to take a look at, and like how what we're hoping to be a flexible set of tools can sort of plug for a specific need that you're seeing in your community. We'd want to get our sort of hands into the project and see where we can work with you to make your goals a reality.
Can you now talk about the balance between preserving public land and developing new housing? And then related, but a little separate, can you talk about the need for updating the infrastructure, which I'm pretty sure you all heard a lot about, with water and sewer infrastructure in rural communities?
So yeah, I'll take the second one first. Um, Infrastructure, that will be included if we're successful in getting the critical infrastructure investment fund. Like, we heard across the state that we need funding to like draw up new water lines, to draw up new sewage lines. That in certain instances we need to expand plant capacity. In certain places, we know that natural gas might be an issue, or that roadway infrastructure might be an issue. That infrastructure fund, like the goal is to solve for both site development, like at a specific site, and solve for whatever infrastructure tie-ups or infrastructure expansions may be necessary to create more units at a specific location. In terms of like land preservation versus housing stock construction rehabilitation, I think the administration's view on that is that we can appropriately do both broadly across the state. Both allow for the construction of new units and allow for the preservation of public spaces. Again, I know in specific communities, like there have been, for example, a historic build up to this point of preservation efforts where there is a lot of land that might be constrained or tied up in covenants, whether those be agriculture, whether that be state game land, whether that DCNR owned land. In those specific communities, if that is an issue that the community is seeing, I think we, again, not to default to case by case, but on a case by case basis, we would want to address that broadly in terms of the Commonwealth. I think we can achieve both goals simultaneously.
Excellent. I believe that you did share an estimate of how many single-family homes are now owned by private equity investors. If you did, if I'm right, can you repeat that? But also, can you talk a little bit about any strategies that the plan includes around working with, for lack of a better word, the number of private equity investors, which is also, of course, we hear a lot about it with rental properties.
Sure. So the plan states and the data shows that nationally in 2024, 13% of single family home sales were attributable to large private equity firms. In terms of an exact number in Pennsylvania, we have like some city specific or region specific figures just due to studies that, like Pew Trust has taken on, or so, maybe a local foundation in another region. In terms of statewide, we don't have like the number today of the total number of units that may be owned by private equity firms, both for two reasons. Number one, there isn't a consistent definition of what a private equity firm is. And number two, it's difficult to track. Like you can form an LLC. We don't necessarily know what activity is taking place in an LLC other than the fact that the LLC was formed. So, for us, for tracking purposes, it's something to consider maybe rolling into our data collection services as we look to improve those data collection efforts. But we have no real way at a state level at the current time to make determinations as to like what individual activities are taking place in a specific LLC in a specific like parcel.
Great. So as we're getting pretty close to the 11:30 mark, I want to ask if you could repeat the ways that people can stay informed and also be part of the continued discussion around design and priorities. And then I just want to make sure people have that information, and then we'll ask as many additional questions that we can in the time remaining.
We'll do the wrap. In terms of staying informed, just call Phyllis. Like that's the easiest way. That's what I do in terms of housing policy. It's the easiest, most accessible way to stay informed. No, we're going to continuously, our social media channels across the government, right? Both the governor's DCD, DHS, PHFA, our sister agencies, are going to be continuously posting as we make progress on the housing action plan. We're going to be a consistent presence at events. If there's, a speaking engagement you want us to take on in your communities, send in a request. The deputy secretary, when they come online, Rick Valello is doing his rounds right now to build awareness on the plan. And I think it's our intent to continue to undertake those activities, conferences, engagements like this, social media communications, blast email communications, et cetera, both as we promote sort of the rollout of the plan and as we start to proceed in achieving some of the objectives of the plan. Stephanie, I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, or Bryce.
No, I think, stay tuned. I think we'll know a lot more once the deputy secretary is in place and has a chance to orient themselves and figure out some different structures moving forward. But yeah, looking forward to it. Implementation is going to be a good time.
All right, great. So we have a lot of questions, so we'll just do a couple more and then we'll just end maybe 2 minutes after 11:30. So the next question is really about how funding will be targeted to meet both areas and populations with higher need. So how will the plan strategically target funds and resources specific to populations? How will those needs be assessed? And then the comment is just that there's a lot of need for housing, but some face greater barriers, particularly extremely low income populations and people exiting homelessness and the reentry population. So any thoughts about how to answer that, how that will be addressed rather?
Yeah, on a project basis, I mean, we're going to take projects as they come in. Um, and so to the extent that like we're able to work with developers, nonprofit organizations, et cetera, where they put forward to us like, hey, this is what we want to accomplish. If it's something that with additional resources we view that we can accomplish, we're going to work to run the project. Just today, for example, I have 3 additional meetings scheduled this afternoon with developers in different parts of the state, nonprofits in different parts of the state, to run projects focused on affordable housing, focused on market rate housing, focused on an office to residential conversion project. And so, it's sort of our intent to, as the market, and this is on like the development side, but like as the market brings us projects and as we have conversations with folks building projects or preserving homes, our intent is to be responsive to those requests.
Great. Can you talk about preservation, specifically the preservation of publicly subsidized rental housing and how that impacts and can be addressed in rural communities? So really kind of maybe what are some of the highest priorities for preservation and how that's addressed in the plan?
I would say for this one, I don't know that the plan currently gets into the weeds of this one, but I do think it's where things like that qualified allocation plan, looking at modernizing and or potentially making some changes, could make sense. And we have heard sometimes that the unit counts or certain things where folks need to have sometimes 25, 35 plus units to be competitive doesn't always work as well in a rural community. So I think we could think about looking at different levers to make a variety of types easier to do. And then I might briefly go back to one of the questions you noted before about supporting reentrance, because I do think something that could be within our levers, the Department of Corrections actually has a fantastic housing assistance program as well as a newer reentrance attaining community housing. And they are very actively looking for more providers to provide more support to reentrance leaving into the community. And PHFA has also had a proposal in their QAP where they do have a set aside for folks who come in to serve reentrance. And one thing that made me sad is the first couple years it was in there, no one came in for it. So really someone should really think about prioritizing. Sometimes it's stigmatized populations, but there are a few opportunities that we already have that could be leveraged even better, and look forward to growing those as well as new opportunities.
Thanks. So I will ask the last question. We have a lot more questions. And just note, there's just a lot of really good thoughts and ideas. So we'll pass along the additional questions, all the questions, but the additional questions that we didn't get to, just so you have the information about, again, all these really good ideas that folks have. But the last question will be about zoning, because there's a couple questions about the extent to which there's a plan to work with municipalities on their local zoning ordinances. And before I let you answer, I will just say that, there is legislation that we're working on with 10,000 Friends and others, that the goal is really to not have people have to work with every single municipality in their county, because there's 2,555 municipalities in Pennsylvania. But in the meantime, I know there's lots of folks that are trying to work with their municipalities. So Morgan and Stephanie, any thoughts about how the plan may include working with municipalities on their zoning ordinances?
Yeah, so to your point, Phyllis, tactically, in the short term, we have at DCED, we've increased our planning capacity by like literally 1,000% in the last couple of years. In the event that there are municipalities who might be interested in state technical assistance, I would encourage them to reach out to Ted Martin, to Kathy Rosdeck, and the Center for Local Governor Services to get access to some of their planning folks, to start thinking about like ways that maybe they can, with some simple changes, really improve the climate in their communities, from a zoning perspective, from a land use perspective. To your point broadly, our goal, just like it is your goal, is to make it so, in the future, maybe we don't have to undertake, that individual hand in glove approach with all 2,000, well, like 1,500 have zoning, but 2,555 municipalities, where we're able to make some tweaks, some changes to the MPC, that makes it makes it easier, more effective, more efficient, to drive housing construction and preservation outcomes. And we do intend to be inclusive of municipal organizations as we undertake sort of that longer process.
Excellent. So this was wonderful, and I see that Alana has put in the chat. This was such a thorough and engaging webinar, which I agree. There's a lot of great information. So thank you, thank you. We will send out the slides and the recording to everyone that registered. Morgan and Stephanie provided multiple ways that folks can continue to stay informed and stay engaged. And just note that I would imagine that everybody receives the Housing Alliance electronic newsletter, but we have lots of ways for you to engage in advocacy so that we can move forward all of these goals around making housing affordability a reality for all Pennsylvanians. So thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Bryce. Hope to see everybody soon. Thanks.
Thanks all. Have a great day.